Thanks a lot, everyone. Please come and sit down because there's these empty chairs. It makes me super nervous. So there's that. Thanks a lot for coming. Please, I really appreciate it. I know that there's a pandemic on. I know that we were in a car today where the driver told us that COVID isn't real. Although I seem to have got it, so not now, but earlier. So that was, interesting. Thanks for coming. Thanks a lot to Surplus Books, Surplus Family Books. It's great to be in a bookshop named after the core concept of Marxism. So that's great. Thanks a lot for wasting your time with me today. I appreciate it a lot. I want to tell you a little bit about why I wrote this book and why I wrote this book in this way, if that's okay.
Sorry
in
to interrupt.
2019, I got a phone call from a few friends. Actually, I got a number of calls that morning from a few friends in Bolivia. This was in October, and they said, there's going to be a coup here. The police have gone on strike, and it's an interesting thing when the police goes on strike because nothing progressive about their strike. They were striking ostensibly because Evo Morales' government had taken away from the police the right to give licensing, which was an enormous source of crime. And so the police had been disgruntled. Other forces in the country were disgruntled. Now you got to remember, Evo led the government for 14 years, won 3 elections with immense majorities, was the first indigenous leader in a country which is superbly racist. I mean, this is an incredibly racist country, South Africa. Bolivia is an incredibly racist country. The white population of Bolivia are fascists, not dissimilar.
Can't
hear
you.
It's not like racism, they're fascists, In fact, the chief of intelligence in an earlier era was a Nazi, like an actual Nazi. He fled from Europe, came to Bolivia and became the head of intelligence. He was an actual Nazi, Klaus Barbie. An actual Nazi.
Please switch off the music.
Pieces of work were trying to coup an indigenous president who had advanced for the first time in centuries social development for the indigenous people of the country. Basic things like housing, food, education, and so on, using the wealth, because Bolivia is an incredibly wealthy country, using the wealth, the social wealth for some kind of social transformation. I was really upset when I got those calls. Of course, what do I do when I get a call and have to, I called Noam Chomsky and I said, listen, we need to write a statement. So we wrote a statement and we published it in the Bolivian papers that day, and the coup happened. Evo was visited by General Williams Kaliman, who was a general trained in the United States and told, get out of the country. Interestingly, liberals around the world didn't contest that, even though Evo's mandate should have ended for his previous election, which nobody contested, in January of 2020. Kaliman told him to leave in October 2019. That's a coup. That's a coup by any definition. Okay, pause on that for a second. Evo goes to Mexico, eventually is in Argentina. I get this news. I watch this. I watch liberals and left people. This is my greatest frustration. Something horrible has happened to the international left. It seems to have totally lost its mind. There are leftists today who want the United States to bomb Russia and to bomb China. I just can't understand what's happening to the international. Don't understand these people. These so-called leftist intellectuals who at the time were saying Evo Morales overstayed his welcome. These are often white leftist intellectuals, okay? Angela Merkel had been Chancellor of Germany longer than Evo Morales. I never heard any of them say that she had overstayed her welcome. But this indigenous man, this Indian, was being told by white leftists in the United States, Canada, and Western Europe, he's been there too long. He's a dictator. This is exactly what they were saying about Chavez. I'd seen this movie before. I was so angry. I sat down and wrote this book in a month. I wrote this book in a month. I sent the sent the Spanish version to Evo. He read it, and then he wrote this thing that comes in the, which really moved me, because in it he said the people will prevail. And after the book was published, just a few months later, our comrade Luis Arce won the election. He won the election, and the movement for socialism is back in office in Bolivia. And Evo crossed the border from Argentina, the land border, and was greeted by tens of thousands of people at a mass rally. But it's not a coup, said academics in North America and Europe and other parts of the world. It's not a coup. And I thought, oh my God, an entire generation doesn't understand about US imperialism. Entire generation. The temptation always is to write like a giant book, you know. And I mean, I've met a lot of CIA agents, and I have a ton of diaries and notebooks and, you know, documents and so on. I mean, my most fascinating encounter was with Chuck Cogan, who was the chief director of operations of the CIA for West Asia, for Afghanistan, Iran, and so on in the 1970s and 80s. I mean, Cogan saw everything. I had been investigating the assassination of a US ambassador, Adolph Dubs, in Kabul in 1979. And that's when Cogan basically told me to come and see him. I flew from the Middle East to see him in Boston, in Cambridge, Massachusetts. He met me in a bar wearing an overcoat, this really old, frail man. I thought he was packing a big gun, he was going to shoot me there. But he told me all these stories, including don't follow the story of Dubs' assassination. CIA guys are always sinister. You know, he says, don't follow the story of Dubs' assassination. But he told me so many interesting stories. And I thought, I want to write something for a generation that has been cut off from the real history of how, particularly the United States, has operated in the world. So I also decided I don't want to write a book with giant chapters, you know, and with a lot of like density, because like I know a lot of people say people don't read. I don't accept that opinion. I feel like writers are not writing a form that people can read, because people are reading on like buses, and, you know, students are reading, you know, on the lawn, whatever, between shifts in, you know, precarious jobs and so on. We have to find ways to get things that people can read. And also, don't you find it demoralizing when the chapter is like 50 pages long and you're like 10 pages in and you're, when is this damn thing going to end? And you just feel like you're an idiot, you know? So I wanted to write each section just a little longer than a Facebook post, to create a form that could draw in readers. That was the general idea. I mean, I say it took me a month. I really damaged myself. I drank a lot. I sat and I wrote this with like a fever. I mean, when I finished it, I really was not well. I put a lot into it, and I decided early that I just can't write a book which is all ugly, because the world isn't an ugly place. And even though the CIA is ugly, it's really ugly. I mean, I can't tell you how many terrible, ugly stories you'll read from in this book. There are some ugly stories, like what they did in Indonesia. There were 1 million people were killed in 2 weeks in 1965. 1 million people were killed in 2 weeks in 1965. You know, these are the same people that claim Saddam Hussein is like a genocidaire, or Muammar Gaddafi is a genocidaire. What about them? You know, people now they know the flag of the Ukraine. Nobody knows the flag of the Congo, the flag of Yemen, the flag of Iraq, the flag of Syria. And nobody gives a shit about those dead. It's like an international division of humanity. You know, certain people are people, and the rest they just deserve to die. The crimes of the United States are so immense, and yet, you know, we say, well, yay, Obama, you know, or thank God Trump is gone. Now everything will be fine. United States politics works in a funny way. There's like a Reagan, and then you say, oh, thank God somebody else, Clinton has come. And then there's a Bush, and then thank God, you know, it's Obama. And then there's Trump, and then thank God it's Biden. It's an illusion. It's an illusion, because there's like a gangster politics that runs through the whole thing. And when you see how the brutalities inflicted on countries, when you see that, when you remind people of that, so I thought it's too easy to just say everything is ugly. And here, the core story for me is the man of my generation. who was Thomas Sankara. I was in college when Sankara came to power in Burkina Faso in 1983. Well, actually he came to power in Upper Volta, most ridiculous name, stupid colonial name. One of the first things Sankara does is he says, we're going to change the name. We're going to call ourselves Burkina Faso, land of upright people. What a great name. You know, all around the world, we see peasants and others hunch shoulders in front of powerful people, right? You know, people, domestic servants, probably even still in Cape Town, don't want to make eye contact with the, with the boss. The eyes are averted. And what does Sankara say? Land of upright people. We are distinguished, dignified people. I'm not going to bend my eyes before you. I don't give a shit about you. That's a power. Sankara. We listen to him speak at the UN. Sankara, comes to the UN and says, damn the IMF, we don't want your money. We want to build self-sufficiency. We're going to grow our own food. Sankara, that was Sankara. Sankara saying, one day in the week, women must not do reproductive labor. Just for one day in the week, men must enter the kitchen. Men must wash clothes. Men must go and pick their children from school. That was Sankara. He was an enormous hero for our generation, an enormous hero. What did they do? They killed him in 1987, just like they killed Hani. I came to South Africa this time to deliver the Chris Hani lecture in Johannesburg. The stories one hears and how the killing happens at the moment of transition. The killing of Chokri Beled, trade union hero in Tunisia in 2011, just when they're coming in, Chokri Beled leading mass rallies. In 2013, they shoot him and he's dead. And the left loses an amazing leader. Look, I believe in popular movements. I believe in the power of mass movements, but our leaders make a difference. They are the encapsulation of our hope. When a leader is killed, our confidence is muted. It goes down. We feel scared. So these assassinations play a role. It's not nothing. When Sankara was killed, it puts Burkina Faso back decades, if not a century back. Look at it now. Look at Mali now. I interviewed Alpha Omar Konare in 2009. Konare said, if only we can get debt relief, if only the IMF would back off and we could solve the problem of the Tuareg, we could deal with the Fulani Dogon problems. But no, they said you have to pay. That's why in the book, I quote Yanis Varoufakis saying, in this time, coups take place with banks, not with tanks. The banks come in and say, there were 20-some low-income countries that paid more to wealthy bondholders during the pandemic than they paid for their healthcare. That's a coup. That's a coup. IMF structural adjustment policies, that's a coup against the sovereignty of people. You're not allowed your sovereignty. So, okay, it's all ugly, but I didn't want to write an ugly book. That's the point, right? Because why would you read a book and not feel confident? See, we need to write books that give people the confidence to act. Many years ago, the German Marxist philosopher Ernst Bloch wrote a book called Principles of Hope, where Bloch said that the idea of hope has to be from the very beginning of the analysis. It can't come in the last line, where you say everything is shit, 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 but we will rise. That's how a lot of academics books are written. Bad, 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 critique, 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 but there's suddenly last paragraph. But, in some road somewhere, shack dwellers marched. You haven't integrated that into your analysis. Not in the analysis and not even in the form of the argument. So, of course, I did what I always do. I filled the book with poetry. So from the beginning to the end, every time I felt bad when I was writing, I put a poem in. Because poets have a way of dialectically looking at ugliness and finding a gem of a nugget of hope. So the book is filled with poems from all over the place. I'm going to end in a minute, but I super really enjoyed writing this book, even though it really took a lot out of me. I enjoyed writing this book because I really felt when I was writing it, I really felt that this is like a message in a bottle. I'm 54 years old. I'm in the middle, bizarre generation of people who, when I was in political age, the Soviet Union collapsed. All our countries were going through debt crises and everything was just horrible, like we are the cursed generation. I mean, I joined the Communist Party in 1991. Imagine the curse of it all. Like The Soviet Union has just collapsed and you're joining this movement. And, there's something ugly about our generation. And Andre knows what I'm talking about because he's exactly the same age as me. He's disappeared from here or what? Huh? Yeah, he's exactly the same age as me. He was born in May 67. I was born in August 67. It's a difficult generation because we've seen everything fall as we were coming of age. Neoliberalism was like the big thing. Just when we were coming of age, people were saying privatize everything. What we should have done is gone into private business. Like if I was smart, I would have gone into private business. I'd be like the head of a bank by now, But of course, we went into revolutionary movements at the time when the revolutionary wave was dying. It's a message in a bottle, right? I'm writing this from my teachers, from an earlier generation to people who are younger than me. I want you to know this stuff because now it's so hard to know it. What do I mean by that? And that's where I was going to end, is that we are facing a sustained information suffocation. Sustained information suffocation. You just don't know anymore what's real and what's not real. You just don't know. I mean, it's so bizarre that that boy from Pretoria, by which I mean Elon Musk, has bought Twitter, arrives in Brazil this week, meets Bolsonaro, who's a fascist, and says to Bolsonaro, I've come to save the Amazon. He doesn't mean the company, man. He means the biggest carbon sink on the planet. I've come to save the Amazon. I looked at that news report and I said, and all news agencies just covered it like that. Bolsonaro meets Elon Musk, this kid who made all his money based on the profits of apartheid, which he inherited from his parents, which nobody talks about as well. I've come to save the Amazon. You're going to save the Amazon. SpaceX is going to provide internet and they're going to check deforestation. And I'm thinking back to my encounter with Elon Musk in 2019, just after the coup in Bolivia. When the coup in Bolivia happened, I wrote an article just hammering Elon Musk, saying that Musk had been in Brazil at that time, and Musk had come to talk about building an electric battery plant in Brazil, and he wanted to source the lithium from Bolivia. And I made a really hard point based on pretty good source material that Musk had a finger in that coup. And people like Musk had a finger in the coup. They wanted the lithium from Bolivia. Obviously, that wasn't the only reason, but provocatively, I said it's a lithium coup. Provocative. Musk lost his nut. He came on Twitter and he wrote a tweet, which I hope you'll go back and read. Musk responded by saying, we'll coup whoever we want. We'll coup whoever we want. That's the old apartheid in him. We'll coup whoever we want. I don't care about your sovereignty. I am more sovereign than you. I am the sovereign. I am going to save the Amazon, which means I am going to mine it. I need the nickel. I need the magnesium. I need the gold. I need the lithium. I'll coup anybody I want. That's the world we live in. But it's so bizarre with the information suffocation that you think he's the savior. That's the world we live in. Super bizarre. Okay, over to you.
So building from that very powerful point about information suffocation, I think before we even came into this process, some were highlighting how there's been, and in the book, he talks about it, the idea that there is a way in which a condition of amnesia is produced. People literally forget their own immediate histories. So a more recent example of this is in the Philippines, where you have the return of the son of a dictator who basically was responsible for, apart from stealing about $10 billion from the Philippines peoples, also a family that was, or a regime that was responsible for a lot of killings of activists and especially communists. And yet they were able to win a landslide election after so much struggle. And what some are saying is that, look, we should be very careful Because just like we saw the rise of right-wing regimes before, this is also an example of something that can happen to us. We can literally forget our immediate past histories. So, and the right can return on a popular wave. And what can that look like in South Africa? That's a terrifying idea, but it's a possibility. Or a condition that can arise. Now, immediate comments on the book, like what Vijay said, it is actually readable. And I just had a few days to go through it. And look, I struggle a lot because I do a bit academic work and so on. So you deal with difficult texts, but this was not difficult at all. It was pleasant. Even though he deals with very difficult subject matters, but the accessibility is important. So this is something that can be used for popular education. Very practical ways. So I look forward to those conversations also picking up in the space, because we have people in the room who do that kind of work. As a younger activist, I think one of the key questions that I've always ended up grappling with is trying to understand this very complex idea of imperialism. What is it? How does it function? Is it really like nations oppressing other nations? Is it that simple? Are there some other dynamics? And how do I make sense of the different relationships? And the Ukraine crisis just confuses a lot of people. And of course, you also have the sections that define themselves as leftist, but they're strangely pro-imperialist, as what Vijay was highlighting. How do we make sense of a very complicated world? And in as much as Vijay is talking about how difficult it is for the 50s generation, it's also very challenging for those of us who have no other reality than neoliberalism and who have no experience of the kind of organization, like traditions, almost depending on where you are, you can sound like a crazy person if you're just trying to emphasize the importance of organizing in a world where people are just used to more spontaneous kind of actions and so on, and an assumption that you can just make things out of thin air, and no real understanding of building structure and so on, the importance of structure and accountability. So an important reference point that Vijay has early on in the book, he talks about the turning point, the 1917 revolution represented, and in particular talking about the ways in which it gave a moment for the working class across the world, working people across the world, an example of what is possible and giving encouragement. And when we think about, and particularly in the South Africa case, you can think of the Industrial Commercial Workers Union, which was itself also workers were inspired, and ultimately leading to an instance of a massacre in which 24 workers were killed. Now, what does that mean in that moment? Vijay in the book talks about how bullets, as he's described also in his comments, in his speech earlier, he spoke about how bullets are basically designed to kind of kill the confidence of people. And in many ways in the book, he also makes an important point that in as much as imperialism is so strong, it doesn't necessarily always, even if they have the preponderant powers, what he refers to in the book in terms of what the US represents, being able to exert very, very aggressively, but there's only so much coercion can do. And that the ability to lift people's confidence in itself is important. And part of this, I think what we need to remember is also about our histories. If we're forgetting our immediate past, we're also forgetting past achievement, past moments that can also lift our confidence. So Africa Day is just 2 days away. They're talking about the OAU, but the important moments that also were signifiers that raised the confidence of people in struggle is the Battle of Adwa in Ethiopia in 1896, where, of course, it was a cross-class alliance, lords, serfs, and slaves, marching together to deal with colonial invaders. But in that process, the very fact that Black people could defeat a European army, it was globally significant and had impact on the continent and inspired the formation of the African National Congress that we know today. The ways in which people realize that Black can also mean triumph instead of defeat. And after so many years, hundreds of years of slavery, of the humiliation, that there could be an alternative narrative. And that is what it took for people to begin to shift the tide. So in as much as we may be weak and fragmented, it doesn't necessarily mean that we are ultimately defeated, that raising the confidence and ensuring that we're able to build independent working class organization can actually begin to shift the narrative. But that's not only understanding it in a traditional sense. We also have to think about the women's movement. Now, when we think about the women's movement or the idea or revolutionary feminism and its relevance today, we also have to understand that what Vijay is talking about in imperialism has to do with the very structure of the economy. So there's this buzzword, extractivism. It sounds like all in the air. But what it's talking about is the uneven integration of the global south in relation to the global north. And he talks about how movements actually arose across the global south, organizing and dealing with the issues, not only at in terms of policy, but also thinking about armed struggle. And that was the understanding that existed and different tensions that existed, that continues today. Tension between those who want to be occupying the streets and protesting, while there are those who want to deal with policy work and actually deal with lobbying and so on. Now, I've walked in both spaces, and what I know for a fact is that if you're not strong in the streets, you'll be weak in the conference rooms. So the ability to be able to shift the tide also depends on the strength that you're able to build on the ground. So we just came from, recently we had the alternative mining in Daba here in Cape Town. And it was an incredibly difficult process because the alternative was hardly an alternative. It was a corporate dominated space. And it was, there was a lot of feeling of defeat coming out of that space. And that for me was more damaging for the groups that came in, because the best thing we can ever do is to be organized and actually go in to contest the space, to shift the narrative, to make people uncomfortable, even if we are not the organizers and convening spaces. So that's my personal opinion anyway. So, and in many ways, we also have to think of the way women are subjugated under imperialism, and particularly Black women. We have to think about the way this thing, because this whole imperialism is really thinking, and Vijay makes the point clearly, it's about land, it's about natural resources, but it's also about women's labor, but women's labor also, unpaid care work, about social reproduction that women do to create the very value that gets extracted. We also have to think about, so in that sense, what it means is that we have to understand the centrality of the Black woman's body in this whole process. So the ways in which gender-based violence, and this is a point that Bell Hooks makes about shame being an important mechanism to induce a condition of paralysis. Now, if you're not confident, paralysis seems to be like the extreme opposite of it. So in that sense, if we can think of ways, and that's what she understood imperialism to ultimately produce through rape. So what does it mean also when Pumla is telling us that dispossession is fundamental, the basis is the ultimate, the violence that lays the basis for the extreme conditions of gender-based violence that we see in this part of the world? And what are the condition of paralysis? What does it mean when you have to organize in communities affected by mining, and women are there also fighting gender-based violence, also dealing with the shame within their very movements, where they're supposed to be feeling strong and confident and leading? No, quite the opposite, paralysis. I'm not saying that the condition for everyone. There's a constant struggle and a pushback. They have incredibly strong, well-grounded activists in South Africa in different formations. So I don't want to project this thing of victimhood. So, but the most important thing also, another important point Vijay makes in the book is talking about how, for some of us who went through the mainstream education system, we just assumed that the primary contradiction after the end of the Second World War was the tension between the USSR on one side and the US on the other side. But no, Vijay makes the point that actually it has to do the tension between the global South and not just the idea of the global North, but the West. That contradiction that exists between those two. And it's incredibly important because this is where you begin to locate an understanding about how the struggles for natural resources, food sovereignty, the importance of a progressive nationalism, not a narrow nationalism, but a progressive nationalism. But also it presents a problem. How do we think about being able to organize an independent working class like organizations, but in a context where it's a much more complex picture? Are we talking about cross-class alliances to some extent? And for me, the argument I'd like to put forward is the extent to which independent working class organization rooted in the women's movement, rooted in the queer movement, rooted in the environmental movement, is able to articulate an independent position. It's ideological primarily. There's organizing, obviously, but primarily ideological. But to be able to assert that independence within cross-class alliances, because I feel that the picture, the movements, the structures, the campaigns that we have to be involved in are by their nature complex. So there are different spaces and platforms that we'd have to be engaged in constantly. It's also a moment of crisis that we're living in, but a moment of critical convergences between the movements who've been organizing for gender justice, the environment, and economic justice across the world. And if this is the case, then the implication is that we have to be able to organize in diverse range of strategies, but multiple, but also in a unified form. There are a number of things that I made notes about, and so now it's confusing me. I have undermined my own self in the process, but just to make the point.
It's amazing. It's amazing.
But to just make a point about Sankara, very importantly, as Vijay has highlighted, the Sankara has an important, he emphasizes a lot this thing about confidence, and in the book it's also captured. But also, if we're thinking about the ways in which Sankara refers to imperialism, he says it's not just coercion, but it's also about they use food. So the contestation about food sovereignty, but also debt and also blackmail. So the ways in which our leaders get undermined, even if they're well-intentioned. And but there's also ways in which, when we think about the debt crisis right now, which is one of the biggest crises that we have currently, Silvia Federici refers to this as one of the most powerful forms of disciplining and enslavement by mortgaging the future to instill a new type of colonialism. And that for me is also important to think about the different types of colonialism, but also the nature of the state that we have today. What has happened to our state? Because there's a time when they're talking about, comrades will be talking about, and I think Vijay cites an example of Cuba in 1967, where they're talking about reclaiming the state. But what's the nature of the state as we find it today? And what does that reclamation process look like for us? It can't be the same process as that, because we have a highly corrupted state that's very, has been colluding in a very, in South Africa, as an example, you'd say that the ways in which, not even just at the national level, but even at the provincial level, government officials just shuffle through the corporates. They get recruited into the system. So they're basically the same people that you're dealing with. So how do we be able to reclaim our state? What does that look like? And what does that look like from the place where people are most confident? What are the forms of actions? And I think that there are many approaches and strategies that comrades actually are deploying on the ground to help them begin to engage with the state, to hold it accountable, to make it speak to their interests. There are movements organizing of small scale miners, for instance, in South Africa, of all countries. You would imagine that this wouldn't exist, but you have artisanal miners talking about their rights and new laws being introduced in response to that, and them going to hold the state accountable. It's a really, there are new possibilities arising from below. But do we even have the movements and organizations that actually recognize that and forge those connections? And that's a challenge, that's a strategy, there's a challenge of strategy, a political problem. Yeah, so I think I'll just end there.
Bravo, great. This is really important.
Exactly, it's open to questions. No, I studied something in the 60s, 70s. So, I mean, it was covered such a lot in response to the objective. I'm interested in this kind of reifighting. You know, how do we deal with reifighting of this? I think it would be actually how they are rewriting governments out there who are rewriting the very history of those countries. You know, I personally like this context because you know, you have a very activist presentation. See, you know, these fascist populist movements are all about eliminating critical mass, critical thinking. And what do we do? Because the trick is to eliminate that very sector who's capable of putting in those critical ideas of history. Getting an intergenerational discussion.
Let me tell you a story about that. between 1976 and in 1982, my entire generation of left-wing people was wiped out in Argentina. 30,000 people were killed. They are my exact contemporaries from college, were absolutely removed. They were taken to a naval school. I visited it. Eduardo Galeano, many years ago, asked me a direct question. Have you ever been to this school? I went there, came back to him, and I said, I don't know how you write your books, because you write about such an ugly history. Young people taken in helicopters and thrown into the South Atlantic Ocean alive. They drown and die. How do you write your books? And he said to me that, we have to, in every sentence must contain an ounce of hope. That's been an enduring lesson for me for years. Every sentence has to contain an ounce of hope. My entire generation was wiped out. About 8 years ago, 10 years ago, I went to Buenos Aires. When we were setting up our institute, I went to Buenos Aires because one of the organizations we had linked to is called Patria Grande, Frente Patria Grande. And I went and I walked into the office, the meeting of the central leadership. I walked into this room and I looked around, and they were all in their 30s. They were all young people. They'd built a mass movement, excluded workers. They emerged out of the so-called Piquetero movement, where they banged pots when governments fell sequentially in 2001. There were about 20 people in the room. They were all in their 30s. I just looked around and I said, where are the leaders? And they said, we are the leaders. They built a movement without any connection to the past. And I remember sitting and talking to them and what are you reading? And because I come from a movement with an unbroken history. So my older leaders taught us how to go and build a shop, union shop, or how to go and organize in the, in the fields, how to organize the women's movement, how to organize the student movement. We learned the skills. Make sure there are meetings, keep minutes, keep checking into your comrades, make sure everybody's feeling okay. Somebody is feeling unwell, go and see them. Build a family, build a community. To be on the left is to build a society, because capitalism destroys society. I learned all those lessons in our movement, but they had to build it from scratch. And now they are party to a government, which is a center-left government of Alberto Fernandez, not a great government. But still, they are at that level. They built a mass movement of excluded workers, mainly Bolivian workers. They organized, people who pick rag pickers on the street. These young people built a movement. It's amazing what people can do. It's really amazing. I'm looking around, there's this guy, Juan Graboy. He's one of the main leaders there, super charismatic guy. Runs out on the street. Every time he gets a phone call, says that an African seller on the street, there are lots of African migrants in Buenos Aires who sell things on the street, combs, cell phones, but they're all illegal. So they wrap the thing and they run when the cops come. Anytime Juan is on the street yelling at the cops, the direct action, deep feeling, you can't kill us. You just can't kill us. They killed my whole generation there. And then suddenly from the mushroom patch, the next generation of mushrooms come. You just can't get rid of us. And it's funny, we don't create ourselves. The contradictions create us. We emerge out of the contradiction. That's the ingenuity of what Marx taught people like me, at least, and others maybe. That, we emerge out of the contradictions of history. But our biggest task is often forgotten by people who become activists. Our job isn't to have the right ideas. Our job is to build society. You can't build a revolution unless you're building society. That's why I can't stand sectarian people. People who are always fighting with each other about some petty disagreements. I have my magazine, you have your magazine, you have your magazine. They're like characters from that Monty Python film. Our job is to build society. And the first circle of our society are our own comrades. I find sectarian people often don't care about each other very much. You got to keep checking in on each other. How are you feeling? Are you okay? You got something terrible happen to you? Did you get COVID? If we are not building society, how are we going to make a revolution? And I found these young people, they just came from scratch. It's unbelievable. So yeah, they did a lot of bad things to us, but we're not going anywhere.
And actually, before you ask the question, and you ask the question to this, I'm going to have to ask you, that mic is only picking up in a short range, and people, for the benefit of people online, could you just repeat the last part of the question, any question that's going to be asked, so that people online hear, not hear what's.
Unless you want to get up and speak the question here.
Otherwise, maybe you want to help. But it's unfortunate that mic is on the lead here, so.
You want to call people? You going to call people?
No,
Calling on people.
You don't have to speak.
So, hi. You're making a plan. So, I haven't read much of your stuff, but I have read a little bit, and I really love the way you write and the things that you say. And I also really appreciated your poetic style. Yeah, that was really pretty. But so when you were talking earlier, you were suggesting that you were aiming to provide hope. And when I was first reading some of your stuff, I was like, I don't see no hope. I was quite in despair. And one of the big things was about information, because you went through a whole host. I mean, you go through a whole host of stories about this one being killed or that revolution being influenced or whatever by the US in particular. And it was just, I'm like, is this true? I had to accept that it's true because it was you. So I just wanted, maybe you could say something about that. Yeah.
Why don't we take a few questions?
Okay.
Oh, okay. No.
Okay, fine. I'll just keep sitting there.
Oh, okay. Thank you for your storytelling there. And I've enjoyed it. I haven't read the book also. So it was quite interesting. I want to know also, how do the youth mobilize and got to that hold up, like you were saying, the mass movement? Because in South Africa, yes, we also have youth, and we've seen also there must be something that attracts the youth, because you won't find the youth in movements and that unless it is something, or they have the politics what parents or comrades are giving them, then you will find them there. But also I want to know by you is, within South Africa, we have the unions and we have movements on the ground. Now, this is what we experience with movements and unions also. It's like we're in competition also with one another. There's no solidarity or unity when we are fighting for one thing, because with the unions, their issues is more important than community issues. And community issues will always be a secondary to them. Now, what we've seen is there's that collaboration with union communities. It's not working. And I think that's why also we are failing, because it's also about a power struggle within these organizations. And it shouldn't be like that. I don't know how you guys manage that, but that is one of the things that is not taking us in the right direction, where we can say we can form this united front within South Africa to take on anything else. But that is the challenge that we are facing, because we don't want, we want to work with them, but at the end of the day, it's like they're also pushing us back, because their things is more important than us, because we feel like as communities, we are being used by these ones. And when things is happening, it's, you're just there. So I think that is one of the things that we are really struggling with.
Shame. You can just. Okay, so well, firstly, thanks. Our life, I say, I totally enjoyed reading it because some of it was so brutal that I had to step away and take a moment. What I did enjoy is that, so I am your generation and Andre's generation, since I know Andre since we were at high school. And yeah, who aged better? So I mean, I'm 50 years old and I'm a mother, and when I read, the first thing for me is that I have a 23-year-old son, and despite being raised by a single mother and a socialist, my son's hero is Elon Musk. And he spends his whole weekend, he is a computer scientist. He's just started working a few months ago. And he says things to me, well, I'm in the private sector. I'm like, okay, right. What the hell happened there? I'm like, there's no lights. And, I'm in the private sector, and the private sector, fuck it, what did I do wrong? But anyways, the thing is, one of what I appreciated when I read this is that, my son will say, Mom, you expect me to believe what you believe, but you never explain to me. And one of the things I appreciated was that a lot of things is tacit knowledge for me. Imperialism, that the US is an imperialist, is tacit knowledge, but I don't often bother, how do I explain this to another person? So that for me was useful as a textbook for an old person, that it's for young people, but here is the facts that I can engage in it. But a bigger question I have is really for us and our generation. So my last, my last position was in the World Health Organization, and I came home tired. I'm despondent, I'm burnt out, and I don't know anymore, so what do I do? Natalie asked me, what do you do? I go swimming because I'm tired and I'm rebuilding and I'm doing self-care. But what is our role? Because, we are leaving an inheritance. I am exiting. How do we, as our generation, place ourselves in this world of the Elon Musks? That is so easy for young people to, our values are difficult in this world. Where is our role? So thank you.
Yes.
Do you want to take questions? Move around, take another one.
Yeah.
And then Vijay responds.
Was there someone on that side? We just want to bring some balance to the.
Thanks so much. It might mean I won't give a speech. Thank you so much to both of you. That was really lovely. I haven't read the book, but I have heard you give talks on it. And I think the two things that I wanted to kind of, as a groupie, come and hear to both of you, so this is a treat, is the one thing is the idea of sub-imperialism. So we live in South Africa. And so, I got asked a fantastic question today. I was asked, now that Schultz is coming to visit South Africa, what does this mean? Is he coming to beg? And I said, I don't understand the question. Like, that makes no sense to me, because we are fully integrated economically, financially into this kind of imperialist perspective, right? Elon Musk, they are having dinner. These guys are together. You'll talk about violence and memory. There's an excellent book on The Poisoners, which basically links what happened in Argentina to what was going on under apartheid, what they were testing, which led to the genocide that took out a generation in Zimbabwe. These connections are quite tight. And then there's some great work being done about the selling of arms. And so South Africa is fully integrated. But how do we make sense of South Africa's role on the continent? And I'd be curious to if we are wanting to really look at ourselves and see how we talk about imperialism, but we need to also discuss it within the context of the continent. So that was the one question. And then the second question I had was around, I'm curious to hear both of you in terms of that. I think you touched on it. It was around building a progressive nationalism. So how can we begin? Because for me, that's quite it's that contradiction. We want to have a good sense of being South African, and like the modern monetary theorists coming out hard, fast. We need food sovereignty, we need fiat currencies, we need these 4 or 5 things, and then we can start talking about integration and globalization and whatever. But if a country doesn't have that, then we're at the whims of debt, control of food prices, and so forth. So I'm curious to hear a little bit about your thoughts around, and not necessarily having the right ideas, but how do we talk about being, I work with groups on the ground, and I want to say, as a South African, but I don't want that to be interpreted as now we must remove all the foreigners, which is our genocide. I think that is on the cusp. I mean, it's literally waiting at the gates. It's going to be a bloodbath if we don't do something quick and fast. People are going to die in this country. Yeah, so I think those are the 2 questions. Thank you.
I think take the 3 and get a response.
So I'll just start with that because it's like, so yesterday, was it yesterday? The day before yesterday, Vijay also launched a book on Ho Chi Minh. And I haven't read the book myself, but from what he was saying and sharing, but there's an understanding that the progressive nationalism of that period, they had an internationalist or a world view. So importantly, this book, the afterword written by Richard Pitthouse, talks about a controversial figure, Mbeki, trying to understand the Pan-Africanism that he is at. One thing he's clear on is his Pan-Africanism. So the way he goes to Haiti to mark the 200th anniversary of the Haitian Revolution and how he's heavily criticized in South Africa. He also actively supports the marking of the Adwa battle in South Africa. But there's so little understanding, even among people who are coming from the nationalist or progressive nationalists in South Africa or the BC movement. Very few people, it's a particular generation that remembers and understands the significance. Others lost, the young ones. Like I struggled once, I was trying to organize a thing on the Adwa, and I did actually go out and look to people. I could find only one person who has a relationship, comradely relationship, and working on a project on Adwa. So he has understanding. But so those things exist. People are trying to forge again, but it's a very difficult process because we really need to consciously include it in our popular education work, in what we write and what we share, the narratives that we write. So I'll give you the example of Charlotte Mataite. So there was a publication put in the newspapers reflecting on her legacy. And a big debate broke out around whether the ANC can claim her and all of that. But what was missing is that clearly it was written there, Ethiopianism. And no one was questioning, wait, what? What is this thing? Religion? What is the roots? Where does it come from? Her generation was inspired by the Battle of Adwa. We need to be able to reclaim these histories because it's not just yesterday, it's today, it's present. Because and there's a certain crisis unfolding in Ethiopia, and it raises questions that are relevant to South Africa. So things about identity formation, ethno-nationalism, because they also have very deep debates there. And the consequences of failure are also being played out in very scary ways. What does that mean? How do we make sense of the different groupings and understandings of nationalism and the ways in which also the communists have been dealt with there? Because they were also wiped out. So going there to organize, it's a very difficult context, not impossible, There are contradictions still. You go to where the contradictions are, and from there you organize. And Marxism as an instrument or as a tool, as an ideology, as a perspective rooted in the things that are actually happening every day and beginning to make sense of it. And that's the way it should play itself out, and particularly the ways in which women are being integrated in their industrial parks and so on. Important contradictions there to examine and figure out and see what the organizing can look like today. Very hostile environment, but not impossible. So the seeds are always there, and you need people who are ready to like nurture them and give them some coherence. That's usually what workers actually are looking for. If you will, the role that we can play. So in that sense, and the question also about the sub-imperialism, for me, it's something I also grapple with, but I'm very suspicious of the theory, mainly because if we're looking at South Africa, it's not as if, and maybe that's where it says sub, but still, it doesn't really help us understand how South Africa is positioned, because there's certain things you can't do. You can relate with the continent in an extractivist way, but that relationship is embedded within a white supremacist kind of a framework and agenda and a corporate backed process and all of that. But there are certain things that the national bourgeoisie that's trying to come up in South Africa and assert itself, and for its own, on its own terms, they're not able to even achieve the transformation that they can't even, their BEE is like a bankrupt kind of initiative and process. So the ability to actually bring the transformation and deliver on the Freedom Charter and all of that, they can't even begin to make any headway. So how much of an imperial, in terms of their imperialist ambitions, to what extent have they been able to even build and form a class like an elite that's able to like now act in a way with its own agency and autonomy and whatever? Have they fully formed in that sense? I'm not sure. The nature of it seems quite, it's so complicated because there's so many layers to it. And I feel that there are questions. I'm not saying dismiss the theory. It will have uses, definitely, but I think we need to engage it robustly. And I don't think it's enough when there are certain elements of supremacy and proximity to whiteness that creates a certain differentiation. You can even see it within the country. You don't have to go across the border. Just look at the class relationships between those who have proximity to whiteness and those who are distanced from it. There are differences already there. It just amplifies it when you're coming from across the border. Now they consider you as completely backward because you're coming from this other universe. And for us, it's also because of the extent to which a progressive Pan-Africanism has also lost its groundings in South Africa, which is strange because you have like organizations present that exist, and but they also have their own internal political problems, but at the same time, their understanding is still very limited. So this idea of amnesia and how it's produced, it's something that we also have to think critically about how to overcome it politically and what that looks like, about shifting the narrative. Anyway, thank you.
No, that's super interesting. And I just want to go across the South Atlantic to South America for both. I actually want to return to both these questions and then come to you. You know, the idea of sub-imperialism comes from Brazil. It's a concept developed by Ray Maurini, whose centenary is this year, one of the great Brazilian Marxists. But Maurini was writing in a completely different context when international capital needed a launch pad for its tentacles to develop in South America. So after the coup of 1964 in Brazil, that coup lasted 21 years, you know, American banks and so on used Sao Paulo as a way to, you know, have tentacles into Argentina and so on. But the theory is now superseded because now the banks in New York can be directly linked to Buenos Aires. You don't have to go through a sub-imperial country. So I find it curious that this concept is being used, and it was first brought back to attack the BRICS, which I think is interesting. It tells you something about the way a certain kind of left was uncomfortable with the BRICS project. I wrote a book called The Poorer Nations, just when the BRICS started, where I made the argument that the BRICS is merely an internal battle amongst countries that were emerging out of, you know, a sense of subordination. So all these countries were fighting with the West, particularly India, Brazil, and South Africa, on intellectual property rights, on getting AIDS drugs, for instance. That was a core issue. Or on in agricultural subsidies. That's what brought IPSA together. India, Brazil, South Africa. When China and Russia joined in 2009, it was in reaction to the Great Depression, the collapse of the North Atlantic economies in 2007-8. Very quickly, people started to criticize the BRICS even before it got going, saying, oh, these are sub-imperial formations. And I was very suspicious of that. You took an anachronistic concept, brought it into this period without showing me how it belongs. In fact, the Indian bourgeoisie is not sub-imperialist, it's subordinate. It's subordinate to the West. I would say that a large section of the bourgeoisie in South Africa is also subordinate to European and US capitals. They're dependent and subordinate to it. Their range of operations is narrow. French banks and Swiss mining companies don't need South Africa. Glencore doesn't need an office in Cape Town to be out there suctioning out the value from the DRC. You know, Glencore directly goes into the DRC. They go from Switzerland to the DRC. They don't have to go through South Africa. So I found that theory to be really limited, and it didn't understand the tentacles of capital as it comes into this continent, you know. I mean, you could make an argument for Rwanda, interestingly. Why did the Rwandan military enter Cabo Delgado in Mozambique a few months ago? On whose behalf? It was on behalf of the French government to defend French Total's investment off the coast of Cabo Delgado. That's an interesting story. Tell me, there's no sub-imperialism operating there. It's a subordination of Maputo to international capital. They're completely disarmed. They allowed a foreign military to enter their own territory, and they had to then congratulate them. It's such a bizarre scenario. Now, in terms of this idea of progressive nationalism, one of the great things that Hugo Chavez put on the table is that we have entered a period of regionalism, progressive regionalism, not progressive nationalism. You know, the Bolivarian movement was not about Venezuela. It was about the whole region. And so they were talking about the, you know, ALBA, the Bolivarian area of the Americas. It's a regional concept. So when you're talking about Pan-Africanism, you know, is there any valence for that? Is there a charge? Is there an ability to revive that discussion? About a month ago, I wrote a piece that was published in India called Is Asia Possible? Is a Pan-Asianism possible? Or did the Japanese destroy that in World War II? You know, is it possible for China and India to somehow bury the hatchet of a border war in 1962? Because in Latin America, this is an idea that has gripped people's imagination, this Bolivarianism, Patria Grande. Patria Grande is the name of the party that I work with in Argentina. That means our homeland, Nuestra America, our America. I mean, these are powerful, popular ideas. They don't exist here. Pan-Africanism is a niche idea. You know, can it be revived? Because that's what is going to save countries against xenophobia. When migrants enter, I mean, I go to Yeovil. Yeovil is a Pan-African scene in Johannesburg. You know, I play dice on the street with these Congolese fellows. Some guy from Zimbabwe comes in. It's a total Pan-African scene. That's the future of your continent. It's not some segregated idea of, you know, we are from this neighborhood and we are South African. What the hell is South African? It's a weird name for a country, okay? It's the only country in the whole world that's named as part of a continent. There's no like North Africa, East, South America. There's no country like this. Only South Africa is named as a fragment of a continent. There's North and South Korea, but there's no South Asia as a country. It's very weird. What is the cultural density of South Africa? Apartheid. It's racism or whatever. So relax, guys. If somebody comes from Zimbabwe, relax. Welcome them. They're often more interesting than you. You know? Take them in. Take them in. You know. This idea about unions and communities. This is an idea also about organizations and those who don't belong to them. I mean, this has been a long drama in our movements. How do our organized movements deal with people who are not in the movement? That's one issue. I'll just give you a positive example from India. In India, 95% of the workers are outside unions. They're in the informal sector, 95%. That's basically everybody. That means only 5% are in the formal sector. About 3 decades ago, the organized trade union movement began to recognize if we only fight to organize 5%, we're going to be wiped out. So 30 years ago, the organized trade union movement started to take up the issues of informal workers, particularly women workers. For instance, women workers in nursing, care industries of various kinds, daycare centers, things like that. They took up those issues. In the last few years, there have been strikes of 300 million workers, general strikes. Now that, when you go on the street and see the general strike, there are mainly women workers from these marginal jobs. Often, there are jobs in India, like public health workers, they are treated as not workers, but volunteers. They are paid a stipend, not a wage. I mean, it's just ruthless exploitation. During the pandemic, these women were going door to door, wearing plastic bags on their faces and things like that, getting a stipend. It's ridiculous. So, but the trade union movement decided we can't be syndicalist. We can't be stuck in our shop. We have to take up the issues of the whole class. That means that unions have to fight for water rights, housing rights. I mean, this farmer strike that you may have followed in India for 1 year, 100 million farmers were on strike. It garrisoned the city of Delhi. I mean, it's amazing. Entire communities mobilized. It's a huge radicalizing force. Here's the most frustrating thing. Millions of farmers were agitated. Entire communities came to defend them. And in those areas, there was an election and the right wing won. That's a separate problem. We don't know how to convert our community and social power in these so-called elections. There's so much money. There's so much media power that, Modi was defeated by the farmers, but he won the election. This is not a democracy that we're living in. This is money power. It's intimidation. It's all kinds of other stuff. We have to also face up to that, But I think that unions, it's a big climb for unions to learn this. And I don't want to lecture anybody about what, I'm just telling you, explaining what happened in India. But I also want to say that despite that, the left lost the election. Now, is that demoralizing? Not at all. It's not at all demoralizing, because it has to clarify for us what elections are and how we need to better build power. Every defeat is a moment of clarity. Defeat should not be a time for demoralization. It should be a moment of clarity. We have to learn to be better. That doesn't mean just work harder next time, but we have to be cleverer in our strategy and so on, to think more about what's happening. And I think the kind of discussions taking place in the movements in India now, in the aftermath of this farmers' victory, massive victory, humiliation for the government, and then the election defeat, these two things are both true. So now let's construct an understanding of how can these two things be true. I remember in 1996, I was campaigning for one of our comrades, Subhashini Ali. She was a fantastic candidate running for parliament in the town of Kanpur, working class town. I was going into these areas where there were red flags all over the place, go door to door saying, vote for our comrade Subhashini. She ended up winning. But so many times workers would come and say, comrade, we are with you in the factory. But for elections, we have to vote for the Congress. And we'd say, why are you doing that? Because, they get us water connection, light connection. They'll get a school place for my kid. There's patronage networks baked into democracy. And we, on the left, we don't know how to do patronage. We are like sincere people, it's all corruption and all that, And so people are like, we like you in the factory, fight for us to get higher wages, but here, little bit of corruption is necessary. And so sometimes our sincerity is our downfall. Now I'm not saying we should be also doing patronage and so on, but it also means you should be fighting for water connection and electricity connection and so on. These are all lessons we have to learn. See, I don't feel like the problem is a movement is like this, therefore attack it. There also that attitude, like we found something bad in a movement, let's attack it. I always believe every movement can learn, let's join it and do something. And if it's a disaster, still, let's try to do it. It's much better to be together than to hang separately. So, join it and see. What is one to say? What is one to say to yours was a commentary, not a question. And when you said our time is gone, I wanted to cry because you're only 50 years old. You have decades to contribute. You know, your son is going through a momentary phase. Eventually, he'll discover Elon Musk is a gangster. That's okay. My daughter is a few years older than your son. She's a comedian. She's a stand-up comic. You know, God knows what these kids are going to do in the world. They are going to make a whole different kind of history. All we can do is support them and tell them that Elon Musk is a nutcase. You're in the private sector, go find some proper private sector, not this guy. If we have a lot to contribute, I feel. I mean, I don't know, you guys want to put us on the ice floe like Eskimo, row out and alive? No, we are not finished. We are still here, I feel. I mean, maybe we sound anachronistic, but you know, whatever.
So I have a question though.
Okay, can I point to, there is somebody who's at the table.
Yes, but there's also a logistics issue. Does anybody, will anybody be able to offer transport to Guguletu? I just want to offer for a comrade to Guguletu. Otherwise, please let me know if you can. Yeah, okay, it's sorted.
Okay, I'm not sure if and can you just mention the name we're going out to know what Esther Ramani has had Esther Ramani.
Yeah.
Can you mention the name?
Esther Ramani, please, can you speak, please? The floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you. I had my hand up and then I saw most of the questions were from the room, so I lowered my hand. Thank you for noticing it. I'm just very curious. I mean, I really found the discussion.
We can't hear you.
I found the discussion very
stimulating. Is she unmuted? Is she speaking?
She is speaking and she's unmuted.
Okay.
Maybe she can type a question. Because I can't. Can you guys hear?
No.
Sometimes that happens also. Radio silence on this side, but you are hearing.
Okay, I've unmuted myself. Can you hear me? No.
Yeah, no, I've seen comments. Sorry.
Anyway,
Okay.
meanwhile, you can take it to the gentleman with the cap. Meanwhile.
Okay, Amandla, comrade. Okay, I do have a few comments and a question. First, I want to say, you know, when I came here, you know, I thought I want to read a good book, but now after, you know, your small input, now I really want to read it. But that's number one. Number two, I think also talking now to a South African context, I think and I like that Hibis mentions that, you know, our generation become, you know, into a situation where neoliberalism is all we know, and you know, nothing of prior societies and so on. But I want to add also onto that, you know, we also our generation, we come into a time whereby, you know, the two-stage revolution system is already in play, you know, like the political revolution first and then the economy after. So it's already in play, and now we are building movements in that situation. So now also our movements tend to fight political struggles, but excluding the banks, right? We fight political struggles, we exclude the media. And to a point, even critical theories like Marxism and communism. Right now, comrades will tell you that, no, please, we don't want to hear about Marx, we want practical things, you know? And yet capitalism itself is it's a theoretical concept, but we are not fighting it theoretically. And of course it leads into this thing of we don't really understand the cause and effect of some of our struggles and issues and so on. But what does your book say? Because first I thought when the thing was I thought the title was metaphoric, Washington bullets. But now I realize that it's actually, real bullets, But what do you say about the very same bullets that the oppressed can use in their favor? Fanon also talks of violence being able to transform the oppressed to see or to become more revolutionary, So that similar, bullets, violence, how the CIA use it, how can the oppressed also use it, in our favor? And just lastly, very short, leftist and labor parties. I know China, I stand to be corrected. No, India, I stand to be corrected. Almost has like 100 communist leftist parties, right? And right now, South Africa, we are getting there, where we are getting more SACPs, popping out from the corners and so on. What would be your, comment on, how we can avert us also reaching a point where South Africa end up with, 100 leftist parties and with no leftists?
Okay, I think I should add Esther Amani's question, which you just put in the chat because there are commonalities. So may I do that? Yeah. Just to add. So yes, Esther Amani, first of all, congratulates the whole discussion and finds it really stimulating and inspiring. Sorry, a question is about the fragmentation of the left in South Africa and in other parts of the world. How can one address the sectarianism that is preventing us from working together, and what is the state of the left in India? What is the state of the left in India? So that's Esther's question. Thank you, Esther.
One more back there, and then I don't know if the wire will reach, so you can come up.
Yeah, one.
You're all tangled up over there.
Hi, firstly, just want to say it's been very refreshing to listen to you both, especially because I think it's very skewed towards a more positive perspective. And, as we heard, it's very easy to kind of fall into despair with what's happening in the world. And I guess my comments also ties into some of the previous questions. I was involved in Fees Must Fall. I was at UCT, and so it really struck me when you spoke about movements without a link to history, right? But then also building on movements without a link to previous generations, and so for a lot of us in Fees Must Fall, I think we could feel that, especially because the movement was very centered around tertiary institutions. There wasn't any real links to working class struggles, but we also really struggled to build that, and I think we also didn't know how, right? And so we also, well, personally, I also felt a bit let down by previous leftist generations, because they kind of like popped in and they said, hey, and because we didn't listen immediately, they kind of just said, okay, bye. You guys are a hopeless generation, sort it out by yourselves. And we obviously didn't sort it out by ourselves. And the movement fell apart, right? Very quickly in 2018, there was no more Fees Must Fall, and Fees has not fallen. And so the same struggle just kind of continues. But then I guess that also kind of brings me to my second point about internationalism, and how, this current moment feels like there's a change, especially with what's happening in Russia and Ukraine. It feels like, maybe there's a shift in kind of global powers. Maybe now is the moment that we haven't had in a long time. But honestly, it's very hard to even build solidarity in Cape Town amongst different organizations and different issues. You have housing organizations, you have education-focused organizations, and it's even hard in our city to build these links of solidarity. So how do we even get to this internationalism and this kind of global, shifting where we say, okay, we don't want to live in this world anymore, or this world that is like this? How do we even start when we can't even build these links between our generations in our cities, but also organizations and movements in our cities? Yeah.
Can I just add a last question, Vijay? Short one. So just about youth and youth participation. I feel like many of the youth are, disconnected from socio-historical context or history. And so how do we, and also, in the age of technology, it's so easy to be distracted by social media and all these algorithms trying to grab our attention, so that we don't, have the time to sit with books like yours, even with it being only 100 pages. So how do we address that issue, with shortening attention span and all these other factors that distract youth from political issues? And yeah, what could you say? How could we inspire, younger people in this age to act and to take an interest in history and sociology, and to participate in, changing or adding positively to society?
Yeah, okay. These are really amazing questions. I want to start with the question of the fragmentation of the left. I think what happens is that if you look at the history of the left in any country, it goes through phases. And there are moments of great unity, and then there are moments of great fragmentation. And none of these are permanent. So, as I said, I came initially to South Africa to deliver the Chris Hani lecture in Johannesburg. After I finished the lecture, Comrade Solly from the SACP responded to my lecture. And he said some interesting things. One of the things that I found very interesting was he said that, in a sense, I had ended my lecture saying this is the time of the United Front, that there's a need now, because of these escalating crises, there's a need for seeking unity around common agreed upon issues to build mass campaigns. And he hardened and came back and said, it's exactly the project now, that the left needs to build a united front, a united left front on issues like food and fuel price inflation, mass campaign against unemployment. All left forces join, NUMSA, Abaklali, SACP, all of them. In fact, at that event, George from Abaklali had come, and Solly pointed it out. Abaklali has faced a series of brutal executions of their leaders. Talk about, I was in Durban the other day at a meeting, and at the end of the meeting, they wrote something on Facebook. Raj Patel and I had visited, and we spent the day doing a school at their Frantz Fanon school. And they wrote on Facebook, today is the day we didn't cry. Because all their previous meetings had been funerals and so on. I just thought that was so powerful. Today is the day but George came for that meeting, and and Solly said, and look at what they are facing. Now imagine in the period ahead, if there is a united left front on issues like unemployment or food and fuel price inflation. These could be quite powerful instruments in a country like South Africa if they don't get scuttled again by the dialectic between unity and sectarianism. If sectarianism doesn't prematurely return, or somebody says we don't trust this party, we don't trust that party, that's the worst attitude. When the opportunity for unity presents itself, everybody should go there. Let the cycle of unity disperse into fragmentation. Don't force the fragmentation. So that is a very interesting opening. I feel that you are going to experience that now in your country. If a major left force is saying, we accept that this is the time of a united front, I think all people should join and get involved, one way or the other. and then see how the cycle of unity goes. Because that's part of politics. It's not always about being individually correct. It's about testing the moment. And Lenin was a genius at that. He always tested the moment. When you read his writings, he tested the moment. They tested the viability of the bourgeois revolution of February 1917. By April, it was clear that that revolution was falling apart. They continued to test it till September, and then they went for the second revolution. But they continued to test the viability. They were not sectarian. They didn't make the second revolution in February. They could have. They were very powerful in February. They waited till September, October. They tested the viability of unity. Could we unify with the cadets and with, the bourgeois parties and other forces? But Kerensky was wanting to take Russia deeper into the war. First World, the Great War. The Bolsheviks knew you had to pull out of the war. You test the viability of the moment. You go as far as you can go. Don't prematurely try to scuttle something. That's sectarianism. That's the worst attitude in the left. When people are unwilling to test what's possible, because they have a prehistory. They say, no, let's go back. It failed then. Therefore, it will fail again. Then you'll do nothing. I'm going to quote Lenin again. Lenin said, politics is about taking risks and allowing yourself to fail. If you don't allow yourself to fail, you'll never do anything. So that's the moment, in a way, I would say. The second one that's important, I think, is the question of internationalism again, which keeps coming up and so on. And, this is a very complicated time because, my God, look at the left. I mean, there's no unanimity of opinion in what's happening in Ukraine. There's no unanimity. People have all kinds of ideas. That other left which had called for the US to go and attack Syria in 2012 is back now. The US should attack Russia. There is a strand in the left like that. They backed the NATO war in Libya also. Those same people. I don't want to name names, but I know who they are. They destroyed Libya. They didn't care. Okay, that meant destroying the Sahel, frankly, because the repercussions, these people don't know that part of the world. The repercussions of that war is gone all the way down to Niger. Agadez is now the world's largest drone base that the US has. Very unknown that they have a massive drone base. The French have garrisoned the town of Arlit. This is the consequences of that. Imagine it's really interesting that at the time when people should be calling for negotiations and so on, the West wants to arm Ukraine. They are willing to let the Ukrainians die for an objective that's greater than Ukraine. Why aren't they calling for peace immediately? That's what should, anyway. I don't want to get into that. I'm just telling you that the divisions are so stark and the bewilderment is so great. It's really demoralizing for people. The attacks, Facebook is the worst place to discuss any politics. And my God, there are some people who are professional Facebook politicians. They are professionals. They go from page to page attacking people. They don't do anything. They sit in their house in their underwear attacking you on Facebook all day long. Go and build something, man. I want to see you test your ideas in the world. Go out and build something. Go tell people in Durban that you want to support the Western bombers as they go and bomb Russia. See how that will feel. I'll be interested to see how many people will come behind your signs and so on. Test your ideas in the world. Don't just yell about them. But we have to have a commitment to internationalism. We are committed to ending warfare. Look, I would like the United States to come back to the arms control regime. The US left the anti-ballistic missile in 2002. The US left the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty in 2019. Come back to these treaties. You can't say other people are starting wars and then you are leaving these treaties with immense lethal arsenal that you want to deploy in Finland and in Taiwan. You are the ones saying we want to weaken Russia. Russia is a major nuclear power. Calm down, guys. That was Lloyd Austin. Calm down. We need to be also clear what's going on. So our internationalism is partly what you just said, which I think is correct, that actually, sorry, fellas in Washington, things are happening in Eurasia that you can't control. Eurasian integration is inevitable. The German Chancellor Schulz is coming here, 30% of their energy comes from Russia. Only 6% of India's oil comes from Russia. Yet when Jaishankar, the Indian foreign minister, external affairs, was in Washington, standing next to Blinken, the reporters, they talk like this, Washington Post. When is India going to stop supporting Russia? He was super calm. And then he said something which is amazing. He said, I have studied this. He said, the oil that India buys in a month, Europe buys in an afternoon. Think about it. And that was the end of his answer. Blinken was there, Lloyd Austin was there. Because even the right-wing Indian government knows Eurasian integration is inevitable. The Americans are trying to stop it by force because their hegemony is threatened by this. So we have to understand the world is changing. That's why Cyril Ramaphosa, whatever you think about his politics, on this issue he's being driven by the realities of the world. People say, why isn't South Africa supporting the US position? Because they understand the realities of the world. This is an insane country. Why isn't there a train? Why did, FMEA and I have to fly from Johannesburg to Cape Town? There should be a high-speed train. We should come here in a matter of some hours. Who's going to build the train for you? Definitely not the Yanks. The Yanks don't know how to build high-speed trains. They can't build infrastructure in their country. That you're going to have to cut a deal with the Chinese. Sorry, it's a reality. Everybody knows that. You may not like to admit it. We know the world is changing. And people like Ramaphosa and all, they may not agree with them, but they're not unintelligent people. They know what's up, right? So I would, and then quickly, I'll just do the other two. I mean, your question, both of them are about Fanon. The youth question and the question of violence. I'm really glad Inkani is bringing out the Zulu translation of Wretched of the Earth. And I hope, firstly, I hope you buy a lot of Inkani books as they keep coming and support Inkani books, an amazing publication history ahead of it, because Inkani is going to publish all the Nkrumah books, collection of Amilcar Cabral, collection of Ruth First, and we are going to work with the Chris Hani Institute to do collections of Hani and so on. It's going to be a really important publication agenda that I hope will be fully laid out. In Wretched of the Earth, Fanon says two things that are super important. Firstly, he doesn't say violence makes you dignified. What Fanon says there is that violence of the people in a violent structure is inevitable. If you dehumanize people, if you treat people like animals, then they are going to riot, they're going to burn, they're going to steal. The violence of the oppressed is not authored by the oppressed. The violence of the oppressed is a mirror of the structure of society. And then he argues, because he is super influenced by Marxism, he says in Wretched of the Earth that I am going to slightly stretch Marxism. He argues there, that's the normal thing. You don't need to have a political movement that says go and be violent. People are going to be violent. That's what they know. It says so-called lumpen proletariat, they're going to be violent. That's what they know. But then he says, but we have to organize and channel people's energy. We have to channel people's energy. We have to channel people's energy around the obstinate facts. He uses the word obstinate. There are some obstinate facts like hunger. Hunger is not going anywhere. Hungry people don't say, I surrender. I'm going to now starve to death. Bye. Hungry people constantly want to transcend hunger. They either hustle on the street, they grab your cell phone, they ask you for a little money, they scrounge in a garbage bin, they go and take some garbage job so they can earn a little bit to get a little bit of bread to feed their family. Hunger is obstinate. Organizing around hunger is a very powerful weapon for humanity, to build humanity. So when one says, the youth are not going to get involved, what youth are we talking about? If we're talking about working class dispossessed youth, They are living amongst obstinate facts. In Algeria and Tunisia, there's a term for the unemployed. It's called people who lean against the wall. Because they got nothing, you know, just leaning against the wall. It's a very evocative phrase. Organizing the unemployed as a political gesture is a very powerful thing, because people who are unemployed understand that the lack of work is also crumbles their dignity. You can't live. So these obstinate facts have to be the core of politics, which is why, just to return to the theme of the United Front, if a United Front is organized around obstinate facts, you can build mass movements. Millions of people can get organized. Millions of people. Why should people, we were driving into town, there's that slavery fort, or whatever it's called. Huh? Castle. Right at the lip of it is a homeless encampment. That's an obstinate fact. People who don't have homes, they build their home. They build it somewhere or the other. They use whatever materials, corrugated iron, plastic sheets. They build a home. Sometimes they'll get some electricity connection. They'll get a satellite dish. They'll watch TV. You know how the bourgeoisie are. They'll say, look at the poor, they have cell phones. Well, what do you expect people to do? Why shouldn't they watch TV? Why shouldn't they have cell phones? Why shouldn't they have pleasure and joy in their lives? What's wrong with you? You're an animal for behaving like that, saying, why do they have cell phones? Why do you have 6 houses? You know, in the Ho Chi Minh Day, I mentioned that 22 billionaires, including Elon Musk, have more wealth than all the women in Africa. That's 325 million women, have less wealth than 22 individuals, one of whom is Elon Musk. Please tell your son that. Yeah, how great is that fact? You know, what kind of people are these? I have absolutely no respect for these people. How do they live like that? It's grotesque. But we can't organize by shaming them. They don't care. They are building planets for themselves. But we can organize the people around the obstinate facts. And you can't say, okay, let's take up the gun. Those days are gone. Those days are gone. We'll get obliterated. This is a highly sophisticated society with a state that is so powerful, with a security force that is not only government security, but private. Everywhere you turn, there's some buzzing bees security or lamppost security or what all bloody creative names they have. Everywhere you turn, there's jeeps driving around with armed private guards. We can't do that. That's in the past. I learned that from Chavez. Chavez used to always say, we've got to build the confidence of the people. You march with the people. Don't go to the forest with your guns and say, we are going to bring the revolution from there. That was Cuba, 1953, 54, 55, up to 59. That's a long time ago. You can't go to the Table Mountain and sit there and say, we are a FOCO. We are going to build a revolution. And say, they'll obliterate you in 5 minutes. They'll send armed drones to obliterate you. You know, you can't fight the state. You have to fight the state with people. I'm not just saying that for the security services that are listening, okay? I actually believe that. So just to be clear, there's no secret meeting after this, okay?
Thanks, Vijay. It's 9:44, so we have to bring in.
Wow, man, that was a really quick bunch of hours, man. Wow. That's a fast bunch of hours.
Should we just open it for another question or Charles?
But you have to take a few more questions. What do you think? A few more questions. You're going to make a comment, Michael, will see if there's 1 or 2 more questions.
So no, I just wanted to share that something that has been really, and it was to the point that you raised about how do we get young people, and you're saying which young people. And it's just to reiterate the point you said about poetry. So we've been doing some very interesting work around like futures thinking. So thinking about and you can always access people in their imaginations and through play, but also then linking it to practical conversation. So you can say, what can you imagine Cape Town looking like? If the people living by the castle, what would their lives be like? And we've had some really good responses, and they actually had the launch here, Our Move Next. So if you want to have a look at it, it's Our Move Next. And that was the first of that project, where we had artists and writers and activists who don't get a lot of time to be able to start thinking about the positive, the future, being hopeful. I mean, some of it was pretty negative, but there is some hope in there. So just as an idea, you can meet people where they're at. I think you said once in one of your talks. Yeah. Yeah.
I think to just close off, I'd like to also draw attention to the fact that it's important to recognize that the period of armed struggle is over, but the period of armed struggle also, and the book highlights this, it wasn't just about AK-47s. There was also the ways in which teachers, doctors, and technicians also had a role to play in the struggle. And we have to start thinking about that role and that place of the people who occupy these positions in society or who are organized, for them to also envision their role differently and build different relations as we're trying to build the society we want. And it doesn't have to be so big. It can be about building that at the local level. So the ways that you're thinking about artists and the way they can reimagine society, there's also the ways in which we can have other people also reimagining their roles and relationships around the nature of work. Because even the nature of work itself is changing. And there are ways in which we have to think about work so differently, in the ways that it's located, the kind of work that's not valued, and beginning to value that kind of work and what that looks like. You have to literally build an alternative from below in our own spaces, but the ways that can then feed into the kind of pressures and demands that we make to the state ultimately. But then, and creating that in our own spaces to kind of prefigure the kind of changes that we want to see. But then I would also like to draw attention to the fact, because the sister talked about from Feast Must Fall, you talked about the kinds of challenges that the movement faced in certain periods, and that intergenerational kind of conversation. And what I'd like to highlight is that, and Leanne Naidoo actually highlighted this once in a meeting in Johannesburg. She talked about how the past generation is probably also dealing with PTSD. So there are some deep innate kind of challenges and problems and issues and trauma that exists from the past experience. Living under apartheid, but struggling under it and losing people. People are very conscious about who they lost, and we are conscious also about who we lost in our cycles of struggle and so on. And not just in the immediate protest, but just life itself, seeing the way capitalism just takes and breaks people. So the people that we lose through that whole process. And that's also part of the trauma of just being alive, or the struggle to just stay alive in itself. The disposable Black woman, how you navigate the world, knowing how disposable that you actually are, and actually seeing that happen to people around you constantly. The women who keep getting missing because they are getting kidnapped and violated in different ways. What does that mean to survive in such a society? So we have a lot of pain. And so I think that the ways that we're not very good with naming pain. There was a sister with the Housing Assembly who have activists here, but there was a sister who was with them, Amanda, and we experienced her as someone who knew how to speak to pain. She passed away during the high point of the COVID crisis, but she knew how to talk about pain, own pain, speak it, even if it's difficult. Like, that was something excellent for us, because she put it out there for us to deal with. And I think that there's a praxis of care that also needs to come into spaces, so we know how to deal. And I've seen Abahlali actually do that in practice, where someone who's not even part of Abahlali just says, look, my shack has been burnt down, or my siblings have been evicted, and they just know how to respond with care and concern, just to show up for people. And I think that in many ways, we just don't know how to show up for each other, as Vijay was also saying himself. Then there's the other issue of divide and rule. the imperialist tactics that were used to kind of break us. The ways in which the divisions that exist amongst us also get amplified through our own actions and our own ways of thinking and our own ways of operating, the kind of ideological things that we internalize. And in many ways, peace must fall fragmented precisely around those questions. What do you do with the foreigner? And gender-based violence, how we deal with the violence against women in spaces when comrades actually violate each other, rape happens. How do we hold each other accountable? And around money. We didn't know how to do that very well because there's no practice of accountability. Some of the things actually have to be new ways, breakthroughs that need to be made. So it's not even just that the older generation has to teach us, we have to figure things out because there is no practice of accountability within movements. Even when they set up organizations and they have NGOs and whatever, they don't have a practice of accountability. It's a serious crisis. Then there's also the question of what do we do now moving forward? And there's this incredible movement that some of you will definitely be aware of in Francophone Africa who are resisting the French military and ousting them actually of countries. And we know that in the vacuum, their own militaries have stepped in. And that's also an expression of the fact that we don't have enough confidence to have our own leaders build movements and organizations that can have the weight to step in when there's a vacuum. And this is a historical problem that we've had. But in the midst of that, political opportunity and possibilities have arisen. While this is happening in West Africa, in the Horn of Africa, you have the No More movement that's also trying to push an anti-American positioning to ensure more space for national sovereignty. Very complicated because you also have local elites doing all kinds of things in the midst of that. But so countries like Somalia, for instance, you have this upswell of people who are using social media, these very tools that we're looking at, but also on the streets protesting, but coming together across the different countries. So the first time we're seeing people in a very long time from the Horn of Africa coming together, saying that we're supporting this country, we're supporting we are working together. It's a new period that we're entering. So people are responding to the shifts as they're happening there. And I think that in many ways, I think that we need to be able to build those connections, because the only way you can do that is if you identify that we have a common enemy. Once you know you have a common enemy, you understand that strengthening the struggle of this person actually deals with the same problem that I'm having. So until you begin to build those kinds of bridges. So I don't want to pretend that it's easy to do if in our own city right here where we are based, we find that it's very difficult to unite and to create a space for people to come together. But I think that in many small ways and in big ways, you can begin to do that. I'm hopeful that we'll be able to build from that from here, because it's concrete actions. It's not going to come from some other space or whatever. We have to be able to build that now. And Surplus is a space like that. It's a non-sectarian space open to people to be able to come in, to meet, to talk. So this is the beginning, the seeds that we can then nourish. So yeah, that's enough.
I just want to say thanks a lot for that. That was amazing. And it's such a pleasure to sit with you and talk because these are appalling things to talk about, but I think it's fun to talk with you about them. So thanks a lot. I really appreciate it. I want to welcome all of you to come to the website of the organization that I direct, which is called thetricontinental.org. Every week, it comes under my name, but people contribute to it. We send out a newsletter, which reaches now about 1 million people in about 8 languages. It's a pretty interesting thing that's happened with that newsletter. Because it reaches a lot of people. The last newsletter was about art and about a dossier we produced on the 80th anniversary of the Mao's lectures on Yan'an. And the newsletter is about the assassination of Shirin Abu Akleh and the way in which, in a sense, she was killed in Jenin, where the Freedom Theater, the Palestinian Freedom Theater is located, where its founder had been killed about a decade plus ago. And Giuliano Mir Khamis had been killed about, I think, 10, 11 years ago. And so then it goes into our opportunity to think about culture as a place to have conversations about society and as a place to you can't change the world in culture, but you can start to appreciate different possibilities in the realm of culture, which then sets you out to do other things and to try to build power. Culture is a great place to have a conversation about how bad our society has become. But anyway, the main point is please go and subscribe to the newsletter, tell other people about it, look at the material we produce, it's all available free. Now that comes to an interesting issue, and I want to end here. Talk about information war. The moment our institute, where FMEA and I work and others work, started to build its own legs and started to develop, people develop an interest in it, the attack started. Where do you get the money from? And it just saturated social media. I mean, I've been attacked a lot, also physically and also by the police in different places and all of that, that's fine. But this was interesting. These accounts emerge and there's like a denial of service attack against you on the basis of, are you a Chinese agent? And that's interesting. And that makes you think always. So I just want to say that who cares where the bread comes from? The main thing is we're doing the work we do. It's interesting that even that when the suspicion is sowed, when the doubt is sowed, people who take money from like George Soros are then high and mighty saying, where do you get the money from? It's pretty cool for them to take the money from the Rockefeller Foundation, Ford Foundation, George Soros, governments of the United States. Downstairs is Susan Williams' terrific book, White Malice, about how the CIA was walking around in the African continent, just throwing money, dollars at artists and people and so on. So interesting that people have such an interesting attitude towards when the critique starts to get legs. So come join us, see what you think about the work we're doing, send us your own critiques, but for God's sake, let it be a serious critique. And I would also just like you to know that we are not afraid of anything. We welcome criticism. We also welcome the attacks. If they're not attacking you, and this is what I was telling them at Abaklali 3 days ago, the reason your comrades, our comrades are being killed is because you're building power. When you start building power, they come for you. Be prepared for that. We are ready. We are ready. I've been in this movement for over 35 years. I'm ready. I started as a student activist. I'm ready. I've been in jail. I've done my time. I'm ready. I'll go back again. We are not afraid of them. We are not afraid of them. Those people in Abaklali that you mentioned, they are not afraid. Come, we are ready for you. Come listen to our talk. Those of you who are here to inform. I hope you learn something and go back and write a report where you say, I listened to them and actually they're right. Thanks. Really good.
Vijay once again, and everybody who's coming tonight. The book is on sale. It's here now, but there will be something downstairs. So join us and please don't just leave. Interact and say hello to Vijay, meet the comrades, and sorry,